Kayln is doing that. I just want to thank everyone who's on here who joined us for our presentation. It won't really be a lecture style. We wanted to kind of provide a little space, kind of like a table talk to discuss like our experience being, women of color in higher education and our experience through the pandemic and even with the racial unjust. So we just wanted to kind of create this space to kind of, again, share our experience, the effects of our experience, and how we could build allyship. So it's myself and Kayln and Dr. Hudson. They're here to join me with this discussion. So I'm Judine Sabal. I start my fieldwork this coming summer. I'm excited about that. I'm originally from Chicago, but I'm currently residing in Las Vegas, but I'm counting down my days until I depart. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. And next, I'm introducing to Kayln.
So a little bit about me. I am finishing up the first part of internship with a few of the people on this presentation. I currently live in Anchorage, Alaska. And yes, today it is pretty cold. It is about 12 degrees and snowing, which is kind of odd for April, but I went to undergrad at a historically Black college and university. And so I think that this kind of offers me a different perspective on this particular topic. Dr. Hudson.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Denita Hudson. I am currently full-time faculty here at the Chicago School. And I have been a counselor educator since I think about 2006. So it's been a while. And I've worked in many environments and have worked hard to really help to create safe spaces for students, and have struggled in some areas with inequity and challenges with being like the only Black faculty, with trying to support our African-American students and feeling like I'm doing that battle by myself. And so I come from that experience, as well as being a counselor. I've been a counselor for a little over 20 years and have worked in the area of racial trauma with clients, and especially with professional African-American men and women who have dealt with some of the challenges of being in professional environments and trying to manage that environment, as well as their own personal experiences.
I want to just add in, Kayln brought up a good point when she mentioned like where she attended undergrad. So I actually attended undergrad at a predominantly white university. And so I think where we're going with this conversation, that was a good point for you to mention and for me to throw in my background. You could go next. So the outcomes that we want out of this discussion, it is an open discussion, so please feel comfortable to get yourselves off of mute, or maybe I could do that. But just for us to like really talk and communicate. But the outcomes we want to get out of this, to discuss experience of racial trauma associated with Black women in higher education. We want to identify the effects of racial unjust and the pandemic on the mental wellness of Black women, as well as finally building support and allyship for Black women in higher education.
Uh-oh. What is going on?
Technology. Well, we don't need technology to tell our stories. So I'll go ahead and get started. And then again, like, please don't be scared. Definitely take yourselves off the mute. It's open discussion to share, or even in the comments, whatever you most feel comfortable with. But when it comes to experience, I guess, during the pandemic and everything that was happening with racial unjust, I think for me, So I reside in Las Vegas, and I think I got to a point where, like I talked to Dr. Hudson about this, but it was just like being in Vegas, I felt so far away from everything that was happening. Like, and to the point where like, so just being in Chicago or being in the middle of where everything takes place, like I feel like I'm very passionate and like I have an advocate in me, like a little spirit in me. But being in Vegas, it was so different. Like when Mike Brown and Sandra Bland's situation happened, like I was around, I was close enough. But when it happened here in Vegas, like I felt completely far away from everything that was happening. And I just felt like in the academic world, I felt like I was the only one who was affected by it. And the reason why I say that is because like at that point, I realized I was battling like racial fatigue. I didn't know what it was at first, but I was like always tired. I was sleepy. Like I just wasn't myself. And then to see like my classmates being able to like do their discussions and still like, it just seemed like everyone still had it together. Meanwhile, I'm struggling, you know, and then to be in Vegas detached and then to still have to go to work. Like I felt like I didn't have any support. And then with the pandemic also, like it revealed to me being a Black woman, I guess I responded out of trauma. My response, so like in the beginning. So it's funny because it's like, I was supposed to present for the first time last year. And the day I was supposed to present, I couldn't do it. And I felt like leading up to the day I was supposed to present, I was always working. And the morning of the presentation, like everything hit me because I didn't cope with, I lost my aunt right when the pandemic started. So I felt like I didn't cope well with everything that was going on. I just kept myself busy. And then finally, like it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I feel like that goes to like just being a Black woman, like having to get up and keep going. So I feel like that's where I was last year, like my experience.
Yeah. To piggyback off of a lot of that, like it was pretty much the same for me. And in the beginning of the pandemic, I was considered a first responder because I work in a hospital. Even though it's a psychiatric hospital, it's a shelter in place. You know, I'm in Alaska and we have pretty bad earthquakes. And so some weeks I was coming to work 7 days a week. And when the pandemic started, like it just felt like the world around me was moving and I was standing still. And I felt at work so alone. And like, it's really different to have these urges to like talk about what you're feeling and to do something about what you're feeling when you're the only woman of color in a position of power in the whole hospital. And you know, like I could go to my coworker and be like, man, so let's talk about George Floyd because he is a 6'6" white, blonde hair, blue-eyed man. And, you know, like I can get it off my chest because he has a counseling background. However, how much support is he going to be able to offer me? You know, there were times where our peers, Judine, was like texting me, like Lindsay and Shelby were texting me just to make sure that I was okay. And, you know, able to even put into words what I was feeling. And for a long time, I was not able to do that because I had to still show up. I felt like I still had to go to work. I still had to come home. I still had to go to school. And it was traumatizing because, you know, you get to a point where you realize that that's our norm as women of color, right? Like you always got to show up. You always got to be there. If somebody else is having a problem, their problem in a way trumps yours because you know that your stuff is going to get fixed. It might not happen right now, but you know that in this moment, they need you to be present. And so that was what was getting me, was just being present. And I'm not sure if I felt fatigued by it, but I do know that like at the end of it, I was feeling compassion fatigue. I was feeling a lot of, you know, racial unjust because we didn't do anything in Alaska, and there are Black people here, crazy enough. But you know, I didn't feel that there were people on my side, because you know, skin folk ain't always kinfolk. So you know, I just felt alone.
And I can relate to that feeling big time. Like being away from home and then to be somewhere and feel like you're alone, like, or to even see this, like people of the same color and not to have that, I don't even say it's that much care, but like not to, it's like, it's not happening. Like I felt alone at work for sure. Cause it's like, am I the only person seeing what's happening in this world? Like, why do I feel like I'm the only one affected? Why does it only feel like it's bothering me, you know? And I like to use the keyword, like have to show up. I think like if I had the title 2020, it would be like showing up. Like everything, I feel like there was never a moment for me. You just had to keep showing up. There was no moment for you.
So is it okay if I jump in here, Judine?
Yes, go for it.
All right. So from a higher education perspective, I think this is someplace where we as counselor educators, or you all that are students, could really kind of help. And so one thing I discussed with Judine is a theory that's called third place theory. It comes out of sociology. It was developed by Oldenburg, and his first name is escaping me right now. Maybe it's Eric. And so the idea of this third place theory is that, and this doesn't necessarily relate to any particular culture, it's the idea that as people, we need a third place. We need a place where, you know, home is considered our first place, where we have connection and family, community, love, support. And then work is considered the second place, where we may not have an abundance of those things, but we do have people with shared goals and commonalities in that environment. And then a third place is a place where we're able to just kind of meet and be and express and share and love and laugh and feel like it's a safe place to do that. And so from his theory perspective, this occurs in most of our communities. This can be, like, for instance, in the Black community, it can be the church, it could be civic groups, it could be libraries, coffee shops, places where people can get together and share. And so for Kayln and Judine, being in an online environment, especially in a program like ours, where, you know, we really do try to support our students, it's about creating that third place for them. And so I think that, you know, as faculty, we were attempting to do that. And I think some of it went very well. Others did not. And so because of that, you know, we recognize that some of our students were experiencing this trauma, but it was really important for us to be able to have a place to speak about it and to kind of talk about it, and not just with necessarily people that were also sharing some of the racial trauma, but people who were allies and supportive of the fact that what was going on in the world is not, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not just.
I also think, Dr. Hudson, in a way, like at the beginning of the pandemic, that third place was taken away from us. Because, you know, in like a week's time, everything that we knew, like, it got turned upside down, and we couldn't do a lot of the things that we used to be able to do. And for me, I not only work in a hospital, and so I have a certain set of rules about my community goings and comings, but I'm a military spouse. And so the Department of Defense put rules on me before the state of Alaska did, you know? And so it was like going home and releasing that energy to just kind of be in the air. And it was, you know, both of us were feeling the same fatigue and like, what's going to happen and what are we doing next? And, you know, it was just, it felt like that third place had just, it was visible, but it was unattainable.
I'm wondering if any of our participants, like I know that it may be hard for some of you to be vulnerable because you may be at work, you may be in environments where you may not necessarily be able to share, but I want to also invite you, if there's things that you experienced during the pandemic, regardless of whether you're a person of color, your culture, but where you felt like those third places were really, they were taken away and there was nothing there for you, and it really in fact impacted your mental health, that you feel comfortable sharing some of that with us. We would love to hear your stories.
I'll share. One of the things I noticed immediately working with the police department was that that even though I no longer work as an officer there, that they considered me a first responder because I worked there as a civilian and I had to show up, and yet they didn't provide the same type of equipment that they did for the officers. So now I felt very vulnerable, and that now I have to show up knowing that I'm not provided for or cared for, and the things I use to decompress are all closed. So I couldn't like get my hair done. I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't do the, at one point restaurants were closed. Even, they were they were trying to figure out how to become a delivery, or what is it, a either a delivery service or pack it up and go service. So I was basically, left with, okay, I gotta go to work, and then I come home and I'm by myself. Like, who do I vent to? Like, all of my friends were experiencing the same things, and so you don't want to harbor or burden them with those problems because we're sharing the same issues. And during that time, it was just very difficult until I guess government agencies decided, oh, okay, y'all can all go work from home, but now you're at home 24 hours a day. And at first I didn't go out at all. I just started going out, making myself get some sun recently, but it's difficult. It still is difficult.
Thank you, Shani, for sharing that, and I know that Judine and Kayln, forgive me for, I know that part of what we wanted to do with this presentation is just to create an environment where we're talking, but I can't help but to go back to some of like the theories and kind of what I've learned from the educational perspective. Mm-hmm. But Shani, as you were talking, like I was thinking about like the way we define community. And for each of us, it may be a little bit different, but what seems to be a commonality in all our stories is those feelings of isolation and being disconnected and, needing something to stand in that gap between us and our third place and not being able to find that. And I think that's where, for some of us, our higher education institutions, because that was consistent for most of you, even as work was changing, even as lives were different, one thing that was consistent is your requirements for school. And so I feel like, part of it is that, as educators, that was our job, to stand in that gap for you all while you were experiencing some of the trauma that was going on in the world. And I think we tried, and I think we did the best we could, but we could have done better. And so, Shani, that's one of the things that came to mind when you were talking is that, you were experiencing all of these things that were really tough, and you didn't have anyone standing in the gap for you.
Yeah.
Dr. Hudson, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, I think it being, like you're saying, with school remaining the same. Like, that's the only thing that didn't change for us. I think I struggled with reaching out because it's like, is this an excuse? If I reach out for help or say what's happening in the world, which could possibly be affecting other students, but if I'm the only person speaking out, it's like, am I weak? I'm asking for help, or I need you to stand in the gap. I can't do it. Like, there's so much going on. To me, I felt like it was an excuse. And then I just felt like the only thing I could think of was like, well, then at this point, like, we'll just drop out this class until you can, and it's like, that's not an option for me, because like, I just feel like, okay, it has to keep going. Some people are able and some people are not. And if I were to fall as a student who's not able, I felt like the only alternatives that could be given to me as a student is taking time off. And I didn't feel like I could afford time off. So it's still trying to push through because I can't afford to fail a class. I can't afford to withdraw. I can't afford to take a break, so then it's like still powering through that. But then I guess maybe shame or my own guilty conscience of feeling like I came short, that if I can't power through like the rest of the world, everyone else is powering through it, why can't I?
Yeah. So maybe even that sense of community to know that others that were in the program or that were where you are felt like you felt. Like, it's not just you that was feeling that way. And I can, from my own perspective, I remember teaching the diversity class at the heart of when things were shutting down. Mm-hmm. And, from a personal perspective, I was going through my own stuff with like everything that was going on with the pandemic. I have a teenage son, a son in his early 20s, and, just really feeling the fear and the pain of mothers who had lost their children because of something that was just out of their control, and trying to make sure that they were safe and at the same time doing my job. And I think for me, one thing I recognized is that I can't be silent, because even though I'm experiencing my own stuff, I need to make sure that the students knew that I'm available to help them. And so I remember just like posting, just an announcement that says, if you need to talk, I'm here. That I know the world is changing and this is a scary time for everyone, let's try to be more sensitive to one another, and please reach out. And I think I maybe had one or two students reach out. And so for me at that moment, I thought I was doing enough, but I realized now there was so much more I could do. And I think in Justine, if I'm sorry to kind of pull you into this, I don't know if you're listening, but I think Justine did a really good job of really just trying to connect with students and connect other educators and counselors with our students to show that there was support out there for them. But with that, it wasn't even a sharing of your stories or a focus on, what your needs were. It was a focus on how can we help others. And so it was just putting more responsibility on the shoulders of our students than it was really just kind of giving you a voice to be able to talk and to be who you are and feel what you were feeling.
Thank you for calling me out, Dr. Hudson.
Sorry, Justina. I know this is like an area of passion. I know cultural issues is an area of passion for you, and you work really hard to address them. And so I appreciate you just taking a moment and willing to just speak. But yeah, I think that was one of the things that you tried to do well. You tried to make sure that those areas where things were missing, that there was something to fill them.
Yes, I think that in my experience in the program and just working under the mentorship of my AMCD mentors, I try to bridge that gap and try to stand in for certain students and maybe certain instructors as well, to just provide support. Because I think in the beginning, I got a lot of questions because people were like, well, you're not Black, so like, what are you doing? Right. And I thought that was the funniest question, because I was like, you don't have to be Black to support Black people. Like, hello. And I didn't I think in the beginning it confused me because I didn't understand why people were asking me that question, because to me it was like a no-brainer. But then I had to realize that even as an Asian person, I'm still considered a minority. So people some people just didn't get it. And I think that's kind of one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn along the way on this journey, is that, you know, we can put the information out there, like we can educate people, we can have all these conversations, but at the end of the day, like we can't accept the responsibility for every single person, because there are some people that will not get it. And I think that's where a lot of the racial fatigue comes from, because I constantly felt like I had to educate people on why it's okay for an Asian person to support Black people. And then when the shootings in Georgia happened, I then had to educate people again, because I found that a lot of people started saying, oh, well, you know, this happened to Asian people, then like Black people can support Asian people. And then it kind of went into like this hierarchy of who experiences the most racism, instead of actually focusing on the actual issue that 6 Asian women lost their lives in this shooting. And you know, the funny thing is, when that happened, all the support that I had gotten, like all the people that had reached out to me, they were all the people that I had supported when I first started the Brave Spaces part, when I first started the Courageous Conversations. They were like, hey, I know this happened, I just want to like check in with you. Some people didn't even say that. They were just like, hey, how are you? I just want to see how you're doing. And you know, like Kayln and Judine were saying, like that makes a big difference. Just knowing that like one person, you know, reach out to you, whether or not they know that you're struggling, that makes a big difference. And something that Judine had said regarding, you know, not kind of having that sense of community, something that I learned in the program, and the reason why I do a lot of the work that I do, is that I learned through AMCD that my community does not have to come from the program. And I don't know why, like I always thought like it had to come from the program. And I'm like, and kind of like Judine was saying, I was like, am I struggling? Am I weak? Like, I don't want people to see me this way. And over time, I just realized that my community didn't have to come from the program. So when I was struggling and I needed a sense of community, I was able to reach out to my AMCD mentors. And, you know, I mean, AMCD is kind of like a really big family, and we all just kind of lean on each other. So it doesn't matter how much you're struggling. All you have to do is reach out. I reached out to Dr. Smith, Dr. Sean Smith, when my uncle had passed away last year in May. And I don't know why I didn't think this would happen, but like after I reached out to him, like over a handful of other people from AMCD had reached out to me. Dr. Butler was one of them. He was like, I heard what happened. I just want to make sure you're doing okay. And you know, to come from someone like Dr. Butler, that meant a lot to me. And I think that, sorry, go ahead.
Christina, can you tell a little bit, like help others that may not know who Kent Butler is? Can you like just help explain a little bit about who he is?
Sure. So Dr. Butler is actually the president-elect of ACA. I actually sought his mentorship when I wanted to work on a presentation for last year's conference about AMCD. So Dr. Asia Burks and I sought his mentorship. And then we did our presentation. And after that, I just kind of kept in touch, and I asked him about certain things. Because Dr. Butler, like, and this is what I love about him, he will tell you like it is. Like, he will not sugarcoat it. And you know, some of the hardest lessons that I've learned about my own privilege, you know, even though I am considered a minority, like came from the lessons that I learned from Dr. Butler, because he forced me to own my privilege. You know, when I was struggling and there were certain things that I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable, I don't want to talk about that. He really encouraged me to look at those things. And that was one of the reasons I started the Courageous Conversations, because I felt like even though, you know, certain students were talking about those things like and being vulnerable, there were also a lot of students that were just kind of like, I don't want to say they were like overlooking it, but I think in terms of like that multiculturalism and diversity class, like they did the bare minimum. And I wasn't okay with that because I'm very passionate about this topic, and I know that it affects a lot of people, you know, and I learned from after graduating that our culture is a part of our identity, and that goes with us wherever we go. You know, it seeps into everything that we do, whether we realize it or not. And that's something that I think a lot of students don't understand.
Okay. Thank you, Justine. I appreciate you taking a moment and just kind of sharing as well. Judine, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hijack the presentation.
No,
if you want to keep going, if there was something else that you wanted to cover, go ahead. And then I want to cover some things on kind of what we can do.
I just want to say thank you, Justine. No need to apologize. Like, you should have been on this panel anyway. But yes, you should have been presenting with us. You are amazing. And yeah, so like, it just made me realize, like, even though I felt like there was lots of downs last year, just hearing Justina's voice again, like, I definitely felt community with her. Like, she was one of the people that was there for me. And I realized I was holding so much baggage, and I just talked to Justina and just like let it all out and just knew like she's there for me, and she's always has been. So community is very important. I think I didn't feel a sense of relief until I knew Justina was there for me. Like, and I could feel it was genuine. I probably in the beginning was like, I'm not too sure. Like, do I open up? Like, I don't really know. But just like over time, like, she shows me like what true allyship is. Like, she definitely helped me along the way last summer.
All right.
Well,
Oh, Kayln, what's our next slide? I forgot. Does it go into? Oh, okay. And Dr. Hudson, you could go for it.
Okay. Okay. So I'm so glad that you mentioned allyship and Justina, because Justina, and you know, I'm sorry, Justina, I don't mean to focus on you, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but I really do feel like if there was someone that works to be an ally, it's you. And it's not just about calling to say, hey, how are you doing? But really in the actions. And so some of Justina, and the reason why I'm using you as an example, because I think, you know, you were one of those people that did things well during this time, or at least to the best of your ability. She used her connections to connect people who were very active in our field, very active in advocating for people of color. And she used those connections to try to build a bridge between our students and AMCD and leaders in ACA, and really to help to kind of educate and to let them know that they weren't alone, to talk about things that they could do. And so, you know, the idea of allyship, I think, especially in higher education, it's one of those areas where you can't just trust the words. You need to see that there's something that comes with them. And so I believe that many really do want to be an ally. But what does that mean? What does that mean to you to be an ally? Is an ally, you know, I will do whatever I can to work against injustice. Is an ally, I will educate my family and friends so that they are not contributing to some of the ills of the world? Or is an ally, you know, what Justina did, standing in the gap when things are falling apart, letting someone know, I am here, I am trying to help, I'm doing the best I can. And I think that once you as a person has a definition of what allyship means to you, then it's easier for you to bring that to someone of color and talk about what that looks like. Because then the expectations are the same. I understand that allyship for you means I'm going to educate myself and educate others. I don't expect you to then be marching in protests and standing in, with me during, in this event. I know that's not where your strengths are. I know what you're trying to accomplish, and I'm going to help you to accomplish that too. And so I think before you can call yourself an ally, you should define it for yourself. And then that way it makes it easier for you to present yourself as an ally to others.
I definitely.
I'm sorry, Judine, Kayln, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with that, Dr. Hudson, because like, so in a hospital, there's a lot of working parts, right? And one of the nurses actually came to me. She sat in my office and she said, look, I don't know what's going on and I don't understand how you feel. And I'm not going to say that I will ever understand how you feel, but I want you to educate me on what it is that is going on, how it makes you feel, because I can tell you all day how it makes me feel, you know. And from that moment on, like, she was on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all of these social platforms. Like, oh no, you're not gonna do that because X, Y, and Z. And oh no, you're not gonna do that either because of X, Y, and Z. And so it really made me feel good that I could at least educate that one person to use her place of privilege to educate other people. And I think that it really it came from a really good place for me, because you're my ally. You're using your privilege in other places where I would not be able to use my voice. And that really, like, it really sunk in. Like, you know, in some ways, everything that was going on was almost like the election. Like, people were talking about losing family members over differing ideas. But also, like, in the beginning of the year, there were people losing family members because why aren't you standing up for this? Why aren't you saying something against this? Why don't you try to understand what's going on? And so I think defining for yourself what it means to just be with someone in that is really important.
Right. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or anything that, you know, really they found was very helpful during the pandemic, during, you know, 2020 and the racial issues and trauma that that we all experienced? Was there anyone that found anything that really worked for them? Okay. All right. If it's okay, Judine, can I go ahead and just talk a little bit about kind of what we can do?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So, so one of the things that I'm so sorry, I got like several screens doing, my computer's being really weird. And so it keeps, I can't see you all or the presentation or anything right now. So I'm going to just read through my notes and I apologize. But one thing that I have worked with clients is, and with my students too, like I really do try to reach out to students if I know that they're struggling, if I know that they're being challenged, if I know that even like with some of the things that were going on in Minnesota, I know that I have students close by, just checking on them and letting them know that, you know, I'm here for them. I want to talk to them. If they need anything, please to just reach out. I find that's just part of my nature, and it helps to build that sense of I really do care, which is true. I really do. And I want them to know that. I don't want it to appear as if, you know, it's coming from a place of, you know, I'm faculty and I'm doing what I have to do, when it's really from a place of I'm a human being. I appreciate you, your experiences and who you are. And I want you to know that. But one thing I've learned to do with addressing trauma and building resiliency in higher ed, or even in my work as a professional counselor, is to really like keep the communication open about kind of what's going on in the world. So like Judine was talking about racial fatigue, or also known as battle fatigue in much of the literature that's dealing with Black women, you know, being able to help clients and students understand that. Like Judine had shared with me, and I hope this is okay, Judine, that, you know, she had a sense of relief when she realized that it was actually something, that what she was experiencing was related to something. And so being able to educate yourself so you have that understanding, so you can help others to kind of know what they're experiencing is not just them. It is not, you know, that they are weak, but really something that impacts a culture, or just living day to day in the world that we live in and the environment that we live in. And so other things that we can do is avoid silence. Like sometimes it's very easy. I don't know about you all, but I've had a lot of death in the family in the last 3 or 4 years. And one thing I realize is when you experience like a lot of death, like the first time someone dies, it's easy for them to say, oh, I'm so sorry about your loss. If you need anything, let me know. But I lost my mom, my dad, and my sister within, like 18 months of each other. It may not have even been that much. I think in 9 months between one of their deaths. And so the more that I had, the less people reached out. And I think it was because they got to the point where they didn't know what to say. So like, here are these people that I really thought supported me, and all of a sudden it's silence. There's nothing there. And so the idea, as I was talking to a few of them later on, one of them said to me, I figured that if you needed me, you'd reach out. And so I think that especially as faculty, we do that with our students. We figure if they need us, they'll reach out. We don't make those extra efforts. We don't try to create environments where we're reaching out. We're not waiting for the need to come to us, but we're showing that we're here and we're with them. And so I think it's important to allow students and clients to be able to process their anger, process the rage, the fear, being afraid, being ashamed of some of the things that are happening in the world, or even with the pandemic. I have a client that I see now who lost her son to COVID very, very early on in the pandemic. So we're talking about the first month, maybe March of last year. And in losing her son, there was so much anger because during the time people didn't understand COVID. So the EMTs, when they came to pick him up, his wife had called 911. He's in his 30s. When they came to get him, they didn't want to touch him. They made him walk down the stairs. When he got to the hospital, again, this was just when COVID is really just hitting the United States. The nurses were not as available because they were scared too. And so she had a lot of anger with just the fact that the people that were supposed to help, she didn't feel like they did all they could. And so just really giving her room to process that it's okay for you to feel that way. And some of that may be true. And she's trying to understand that everyone's scared, that this is not just her experience, but it's the experience of many people, and just trying to come to peace with that. And so I think we have to allow our students to have that room too. That it's okay, Judine, that you didn't feel like doing your assignment that week, that you needed to focus on taking care of yourself, and allowing students to know that we support that that's a choice and we support it. And so also with that, I think it's also important for us to explore addictions, even with our students, because addictive behaviors may not necessarily be substance abuse, right? Like there's other things that we can do during the time that, we are really in a state of trying to be better or to feel better. And so making sure that they are understanding kind of how those negative coping skills or negative coping mechanisms that we can sometimes use can creep in. And so helping to increase their awareness. I don't know how many of you gained weight during the pandemic, where you just have more opportunity to eat, and, eating your favorite foods make you feel good. And so just helping them to understand, okay, these are things you got to be aware of during the time where you're feeling really bad. And so one of my favorite things to do with students is to develop what Rowe calls a soul care plan. And so not just with students, but with clients too, because, we all know self-care, right? Like I can ask you about your self-care plan, and you may have one, you may not. You may focus on, healthy eating, exercise, but what do you do to care for your soul? And so she talks about a soul care plan. And so especially when working with my Black clients, that resonates with them because, there's soul music. I remember when my grandmother used to say, that doesn't sit right with my soul. Just they see, as a culture, we sometimes see the soul as really that thing we do need to care for. It's the heart of who we are. And so we recognize the importance of making sure that our soul is in a good place. So when I have clients that are resistant to self-care plans, I usually can get them to jump on board with a soul care plan. And that might be finding time to laugh. It may be some of the things that you would put on your self-care plan, but it's things that for them, it resonates in a deeper space. That it's not necessarily about a day-to-day additional chore of doing something, but it's truly the heart of wellness. And so really just talking to them about developing that and what that might look like for them. And then my final thing, Judine, before we move on, is sometimes it's helpful for people who have experienced trauma to do a trauma genogram. So taking the time to, especially with racial trauma, looking at the racial trauma in your family history. So what have others in your family have experienced? How has your family dealt with them? How has your family grown, or how has it impacted you? Being able to look at from a historical perspective, from generation to generation, some of the trauma that's been experienced can be very helpful to clients to be able to just kind of sit with that and to see how they've either grown, overcome it, how it's held them back, and what they can do with it from this point on. Are there any questions or thoughts on any of that?
Dr. Hudson.
Yeah.
When should I implement the trauma genogram?
Well, I think you can do it in a couple of situations. One, if your clients are coming to you about some of the trauma that they've experienced, and this doesn't necessarily have to relate to racial trauma, you can talk to them about it. If that's what the focus of your sessions are, is on the trauma, then, I would tell them about it early on, have them begin to think about kind of what that genogram might look like, and then work through it with them. So I don't know if there's necessarily a time period in which you want to implement it, but it's just the idea of making sure that they're looking at kind of how trauma can be generational, how what happened to their mom has impacted them, what's happened to their dad has impacted, them and their children, and what that might look like. So I don't think, Shani, there's necessarily a time frame. I usually kind of started early on though in treatment, just kind of looking at the trauma from a generational perspective.
Okay. All right.
Would that
Thank
be
you.
like an intervention? Oops, I'm sorry.
No.
Like an intervention used when looking into intergenerational trauma?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's powerful. Because, we hear about some of the things that happen in our family history, but we don't necessarily see it from a perspective of impacting future generations.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your father was, abused, we see it as, wow, yeah, my grandfather abused my father, but we don't see it as impacting kind of how dad may treat you. Whether, either you were abused or maybe you were sheltered and protected because of the trauma that someone's experienced. And it also helps you to kind of, what I'm trying to find my words here. I don't want to say at peace, because I don't think you're ever at peace, but it helps you to kind of understand those that have come before you and the decisions that they've made, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And also looking at kind of how that's going to impact future generations, like allowing your trauma to be yours and not passed on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was actually going to bring that up a little while ago, because like one of the common themes that I hear when talking to my clients about racial trauma or being a person of color, they always say, well, I have to be strong, or I have to show up, or my needs aren't as important as X, Y, and Z. And every single session that comes up, I'm always like, well, I'm wondering if that's a generational thing. I'm wondering if you feel like you have to be strong because that's what you were taught, and where did that come from, right? So
yeah. So I Kaylin, one thing that I do, I'm thinking about a couple of clients, like I have a thing, how we try to help our clients to be more assertive, to say no. One thing I do with my Black clients, we do not today. So we practice on being able to say not today. So it doesn't mean that I'm never going to show up. It doesn't mean I am never going to be able to fulfill those duties. I'm never going to be able to have that strength. I'm just saying not today. And so just really working with them to be okay with that.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on that too. Mine isn't not today, but like I get very overstimulated because, you know, crazy enough, people ask me to touch my hair and what I feel about this and that, and why do I listen to this music as opposed to this music. And so like, I'm just like, you know what, my head is popping, all y'all talking way too much. Like, I just need some space. So I'm gonna try to not today though. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can say it in any tone you want, you know, it could be very nice, you know, not today. Or it could be, you know, it could be more assertive. Not today. Today is not the day.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about at the beginning.
Yeah. All right.
I love that. I think like one of the key takeaways for me from this session, look, I'm calling it a session, from this, the session is really like the soul care. Like, I really like that. I just felt like maybe for many of us, like dealing with so much and not really knowing, like, how do you get your you time? Or like, I don't know. I just felt like that soul care really touched me. Like, that's what I needed. Like, that's probably what it was. That's probably the key, you know, of course, along with community. But I think there was keywords of us showing up or having to educate others. I think it comes to a point where we just need to stop and just connect. And that soul care is just it.
Yeah, absolutely. My soul care is, I live on 5 acres and it's 3 of it's wooded. And so I saw for the first time during the pandemic, I saw Luna moth. And I don't know if you guys have seen Luna moths before. They're not necessarily rare, but they have a very short adult lifespan. They only live for like 7 to 10 days. And so there was one in the garden. And so every day my soul care was to go out and to kind of just watch it a little bit, because I knew, like, you know, it was during a time where, you know, we were really looking at mortality, you know, our mortality, and not knowing if people we love would be here, you know, 6 months later. And so it was really kind of cool to just kind of watch him. And so I would spend like maybe a few minutes. He was only there for a couple of days, but just spend some time just watching the Luna moth on the flowers and climb up the brick wall and just like recognizing, you know, I know your time is short, but you're enjoying what you got.
Luna moth.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so we have a couple of things in the chat. Frida said, I wanted to make sure, I'm sorry, Frida, I wanted to make sure it was to everyone. I was challenged by the raid on Congress as an African-American, recognizing that my people would never have gotten off the grounds alive. I want equality, but it probably won't happen. And I want more for my adult children than what life for us has been. I appreciate those words, and I can definitely, I feel them with you. And I say that because, like I said, I have like young African-American male boys and I worry about them. My 18-year-old's going to go off to college next year. And so, you know, he's more of a hothead than my older son is. And so he's much more, I'm going to say what I think. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. And so I worry about that. You know, and I don't know if I would worry about that if he was not Black and he wasn't 18 and could be perceived as a threat. But he has a heart for people. He's an advocate. And so although it's a good quality, I worry about that too. So I definitely, I appreciate you sharing that with us, Frida. So anyone else, any questions or thoughts or anything that you've done or you've seen or that you just kind of really would like to just share with the group? Okay. All right, Lindsay, do you have, we have one message.
You're just getting lots of gratitude and kind responses in the chat. I love being a part of this conversation and hearing everything. And everybody should get a CE email today at the end of the day for all of this. And this is recording to whoever's Zoom room this is, so there is a recording of it as well. Yeah, lots of gratitudes in the chat.
And what I'll do, Judine, I'll share like some of those things of what we could do, ways to work with building resiliency. I'll put them on the slides and we will share that with you all. I'll make sure that they get to Colleen, who will put them on the registration website.